A pup, barely 3 months old, alone in the snow. His paws trembling, his eyes wide with terror, but not for himself. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was standing, right in the middle of a mountain road, barking with every last breath in his lungs. Why? Because deep in the freezing woods, his mother was dying, caught in a cruel trap meant for silence. No one knew. No one came. Until one man did. A suspended police officer with a shattered past, heading nowhere in the dead of night. And fate sent him a dog. What happened next will shake your soul, melt the ice around your heart, and remind you what loyalty truly means. Before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the notification bell, because stories like this, they stay with you forever. The snow had been falling steadily since late afternoon, blanketing the mountains of Timber Ridge, Montana, in a silence so thick it muffled even the crunch of tires on the winding forest road. The air was bitter, the kind of cold that burned the lungs and turned breath into white ghosts in the dark. Pines stood like sentinels, their limbs bowed under the weight of winter's early arrival. It was nearing midnight, and the road, Route 49, known by locals as the Spine, was deserted. Behind the wheel of a gray, unmarked Dodge Charger sat Dean Callahan, a man who no longer wore the badge on his chest, but couldn't quite remove it from his bones. At 36, Dean had the kind of rugged, wind-worn face that looked carved from the same granite as the mountains he patrolled. His short, dark blonde hair was flecked with early gray at the temples, and the stubble across his square jaw suggested a man who had stopped caring about appearances since the suspension. He wore a navy flannel over a faded black thermal, jeans, and heavy boots. Not a uniform, not tonight. Just a man driving nowhere. Dean had once been the pride of the Timber Ridge Police Department, measured, principled, and fiercely protective of the vulnerable. But everything changed 3 months ago, during an interagency operation that had gone violently wrong. His partner, Officer Travis Mercer, had taken a bullet meant for Dean. The federal investigation that followed hadn't yet determined whether it was a lapse in Dean's command or a failure in intel, but either way, someone died, and someone had to pay. Now Dean was on leave, unofficially exiled by the town he once served. This drive wasn't part of any shift, it was just motion, an attempt to outrun guilt on a road with no destination. The headlights sliced through the curtain of snow ahead, visibility dropping by the minute. His hands rested heavily on the steering wheel until something, a flicker of movement, snapped him to attention. Then it happened. A blur of black and tan fur leapt into the road, directly into the beam of his headlights. Dean slammed the brakes, tires skidding slightly on the icy pavement. The vehicle jolted to a halt, heart slamming against ribs. The figure didn't move. Dean cursed softly, shoved open the door, and stepped into the cold. His boots crunched on the snow as he approached, hand instinctively brushing the flashlight strapped to his belt, out of habit he hadn't yet unlearned. The animal stood still, a German shepherd puppy, maybe 3 or 4 months old. Its body was tense, tail stiff, snow clinging to the fur on its belly and paws. The pup's ears were back, not in submission, but in desperation. Its breath came in quick, visible puffs. Eyes, amber, alert, and wide with a kind of panic Dean recognized from battlefields and crime scenes, locked with his. Dean squatted slowly. "Hey there, buddy," he said, his voice low. The pup took a cautious step forward, then lunged, not to bite, but to grab the hem of Dean's coat with its teeth. It tugged. Dean froze. The dog released, barked, a sharp, cracked sound, and tugged again. Dean's brows knit. "You're trying to lead me somewhere." Another bark, another tug, and then the pup turned, darting off the road into the trees, stopping just long enough to look back. Dean hesitated for half a second, then muttered, "You've got to be kidding me," and followed. He grabbed his flashlight from the car, leaving the engine running, the lights casting an eerie glow into the woods. The terrain sloped down sharply, the snow masking rocks and gnarled roots. Dean pushed forward, guided by flashes of the pup's shape. the brief gleam of its eyes as it paused every 20 feet to make sure he was behind. The deeper they went, the thicker the trees became, forming a canopy that blocked the moonlight entirely. He was relying solely on the flashlight now, breath huffing in the frigid air. Then he heard it, a low, ragged whimper. Dean moved faster, heart pounding. The dog had stopped beside a thicket of scrub and snow-draped ferns. Something lay behind them. He stepped around and saw her. A full-grown female German shepherd, coat dulled by dirt and blood, her hind leg grotesquely twisted in the rusted steel jaws of a hunting trap. Her ribs showed through her side, and her breathing was shallow, labored. Snow clung to her muzzle, but she made no sound, just lifted her head slightly when Dean approached. The pup rushed to her, licking her ear, whining. She responded with a faint, wheezing huff. Dean dropped to his knees. Jesus! The trap was old, iron, and brutal, likely illegal in this region. Dean scanned the area, no signs of human presence, but the snow could have covered anything. He took a deep breath, pulled out his multi-tool, and began working on the trap's mechanism, fingers numb from cold and adrenaline. The mother dog tensed but didn't resist. It took effort and several curses, but at last the steel jaws loosened with a groan of metal. Dean gently pried them open and pulled her leg free. She whimpered softly, but didn't fight. She trusted him, or had no energy left to fear. The pup curled beside her, nuzzling into her side. Dean shrugged off his flannel, bundled it gently around her leg to stop the bleeding, then wrapped both dogs in the emergency blanket from his backpack. His breath came in clouds now, but the warmth of the small lives huddled beside him gave the night a strange, solemn glow. He looked at the pup, still alert, still watching him, but now blinking slowly, as if finally allowing exhaustion to catch up. "You did good," Dean whispered. "You saved her." Above them, the wind whispered through the trees. Snow kept falling. And somewhere, far from the eyes of the world, a man who had lost everything found himself brought back to purpose by a puppy who stood in the middle of a road and said, "Stop. There's someone who still needs you." The cold had deepened with the darkness. Timber Ridge Forest, nestled high in the northern Montana wilderness, was no place to linger once the sun disappeared behind the peaks. But Dean Callahan wasn't turning back. Not now. Not with what lay crumpled in the snow beneath his flashlight beam. The mother dog, her fur once a proud slate gray, but now matted with old blood and dirt, her hind leg mangled in a rusted steel trap. Beside her, the pup, Scout, whimpered and scraped at the snow with frantic, tiny paws, as if he could dig away her pain. Dean's jaw tightened. He'd seen cruelty before, on both sides of war zones and city streets, but there was something especially cold about this. Hunting traps weren't legal here, not since the state banned them 2 years ago. Whoever set this intended to catch something, and didn't care what. Dean had freed the leg in Chapter 1, wrapping it as best he could with his flannel and an emergency blanket. Now, crouching beside her, he examined the wound again. Deep, red, and swelling. Luna, he decided silently. That's what he would call her. The name suited the calm, strong resolve in her golden eyes even now, even with pain radiating through her trembling body. He looked up. Scout had moved closer, sitting between Dean and Luna like a soldier on guard. The pup's ears were forward, his eyes flicking constantly between the trees. Snow clung to his muzzle in tiny claws. His frame was thin, underfed and still trembling, but there was something fierce beneath the shivers. A wild, unwavering defiance. Dean rose to his feet and stepped a few paces back, phone in hand, arm extended upward. 1 bar, barely. He tried again to dial the Timber Ridge Wildlife Rescue Line. Static. Call failed. He cursed under his breath and turned to look at the hill they'd come down from. No chance of dragging Luna up that incline, not without a sled, not in this weather. And he was at least a half-mile off-road, maybe more. His breath misted in the cold. He scanned the surroundings with his flashlight, and that's when he saw them. Footprints. Not paw prints, boot prints. They trailed off deeper into the trees, just past the trap's original position. Wide, deep, staggered. Someone had been here recently. A man, maybe around 200 pounds by the depth. And he wasn't just passing through, he stopped, paced, knelt. The pattern was unmistakable to a trained cop's eye. Dean's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a random illegal trap. Someone was setting these intentionally, maybe systematically. That meant more danger, not just to animals, but to anyone stumbling too close. He turned back to Scout. "You brought me out here for her, didn't you?" he murmured. "But maybe you saved more than just her." Dean pulled out his satellite radio, the backup unit he always kept in the glove box of his patrol vehicle. It was old, barely reliable, but it had saved his life more than once in the field. He crouched low, tried a distress frequency. Static hissed, then crackled. A click. A woman's voice responded. Sharp. Professional. "This is Ranger Ops. Identify." Dean pressed the button. "Officer Dean Callahan, Timber Ridge PD. Off duty. I've got a badly injured animal, adult German Shepherd, found in an illegal trap about a half-mile south off of Route 49. One pup, estimated 3 months, unharmed. No cellular coverage, no transport. Request immediate veterinary and rescue unit. Possible poacher activity in the vicinity. Over." There was a pause. "Copy that, Officer Callahan. Vet team and wildlife rangers dispatched. ETA 35 minutes. Stay put. Can you provide coordinates?" Dean gave a rough estimate using the GPS app on his watch. "Coordinates received. Hold position." Dean exhaled slowly, one step forward. But the woods had other plans. A sudden gust of wind tore through the trees, kicking up powdered snow like ash from a broken chimney. It howled between the branches, sharp and shrieking, and beneath it, a sound that turned Dean's blood to slush. A low growl. Not Luna. Not Scout. Something deeper. Feral. Hungry. He turned slowly, sweeping the beam of the flashlight toward the tree line. 2 pinpricks of green reflected back at him. Wolves. At least one. Maybe more, moving along the dark edges of the ridge, drawn by the scent of blood. Or weakness. Dean stood tall, shoulders tense, but the flashlight in his hand suddenly felt useless. His sidearm was locked in the glove box back in the car. Stupid. Stupid. A growl echoed again, closer now. And that's when Scout stepped forward. The tiny pup, barely bigger than a loaf of bread, stood between Dean and the trees. His back arched, his legs stiffened, and a sound rose from his throat. Not a bark, not a whimper. A growl. It started low and shaky but grew stronger as he planted his paws in the snow and snarled toward the unseen predator. Luna lifted her head with effort, letting out a weak, warning growl of her own. Dean didn't move. He watched, amazed. Scout was holding the line. The forest stilled. A long minute passed. Then the eyes vanished. No more movement, no more growling. The wind shifted, and just like that, the presence was gone. Dean sank to a crouch, heart hammering. "You're not just a pup, are you?" he whispered to Scout. "You're a damn sentinel." Scout turned slightly, tail stiff, then looked back at Dean with wide, focused eyes. And Dean realized he wasn't out here by accident. This dog didn't stumble into the road to save his mother. He had chosen to stand there. He had waited, calculated, called for help. Dean sat beside Luna once more and pulled Scout into his lap. The pup struggled at first, unsure, but then pressed against Dean's chest and let out a long sigh, half relief, half exhaustion. The forest around them was silent again. Still dangerous, but Scout had bought them time. Somewhere in the distance, faintly, the hum of an engine broke the quiet. The rescue team was getting closer. Dean leaned his head back against the nearest tree trunk and stared up through the gaps in the branches toward a sky gone silver with snow. He whispered to no one. Maybe the badge wasn't the only part of me that still works. The forest grew heavier with silence as night fell completely, blanketing Timber Ridge in a hush that felt both sacred and suffocating. Snowflakes the size of quarters drifted steadily, thickening the air into a white curtain. The pine trees stood motionless, their branches sagging under the weight, and the wind had died down to nothing, an eerie stillness that often preceded the worst of storms. Dean Callahan moved fast but with measured calm, the kind born from years of handling crisis under pressure. He'd built a crude lean-to from a fallen pine trunk and his thermal blanket, wedging it between two boulders beneath the lowest hanging branches of a towering fir. It wasn't shelter by any civilized definition, but it was shielded from direct wind and partially from the falling snow. The space was just large enough for 3 bodies, 2 dogs and 1 exhausted man, to huddle through the night. He looked at Luna, her breathing shallow but steady. Her wrapped leg was propped on a flattened pouch of gauze, and Dean had splinted it using 2 straight pine sticks and duct tape from his emergency kit. The bleeding had slowed, but the swelling was ominous. Infection was a risk now. Time mattered. Scout lay curled tightly against her belly, his small frame shivering under a tattered police-issued canine training towel Dean had kept in his trunk since Rex, his former partner, passed 2 years ago. The cloth still smelled faintly of antiseptic and cedar oil. The pup didn't seem to mind. His nose twitched at every small sound, ears flicking, alert even in exhaustion. He would not sleep, not deeply, until his mother did. Dean took off his gloves, flexed his frozen fingers, and checked his phone again. 1%. Still no signal. He clicked it off to save the last bit of power, just in case. He leaned back against the rock wall, knees bent, one hand on the grip of his flashlight, the other on his belt where a small folding knife rested. Not much use against wolves, but enough to show he wouldn't go quietly. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Just the soft rhythm of Luna's breathing, the occasional rustle of Scout shifting position, and the snow. Always the snow. Across town, inside the warm, dimly lit Timber Ridge Police Department, Officer Maya Lee stood at her desk, a furrow etched deep between her brows. Maya was 27, petite but wiry, with warm brown skin and a long, tight braid running down her back. Her uniform hung a little loose on her slim frame. She often joked she was built like a fox, not a bear, but her eyes were sharp, and her instincts sharper. She had joined the force just over a year ago, relocating from Portland after leaving veterinary school halfway through. Her reason? The sudden, tragic death of her younger brother, hit and run, never solved. She had shifted from healing lives to protecting them. Tonight, something itched at the back of her neck. Dean Callahan was never late on radio check-ins, even when off-duty. She had last seen him briefly that morning, eyes hollow, voice distant. The man was still broken from Travis's death, still drifting. He'd taken the charger, the one they kept in reserve. But the emergency beacon had pinged once from Route 49, and then silence. Maya typed a few commands into the department's radio tracking system, fingers quick, expression grim. She saw the last known signal flicker on the screen. Static lines near mile marker 33, dense woods, no structures, no towers. She tapped the comms line. "Dispatch, this is Officer Lee. Any contact with Dean Callahan since 1900? A pause, then a crackle. "Negative. No check-in logged." "Copy. Initiating search. Lone unit." "Lee, that's not authorized. Stand by until morning." But Maya had already shut off the radio. 10 minutes later, dressed in her winter parka, tactical gloves, and snow boots, Maya slid behind the wheel of her patrol SUV. She'd programmed the route into her GPS and was halfway to the edge of the tree line by the time dispatch realized she was gone. Back in the forest, the lean-to was nearly buried by snow. Dean stirred as a gust of cold seeped through a tear in the tarp. He adjusted his position, drawing Luna and Scout closer under the emergency blanket. He could feel their heat now. Barely, but it was there. Life clinging to life. He closed his eyes and drifted, for a few minutes, into a half-sleep filled with fractured memories. Travis shouting. The gunshot. The sound of breathing on the floor. His own hands pressing against a wound that wouldn't close. Dean waking up in the hospital with Rex gone and a folded flag on his bedside table. A soft sound pulled him back. Scout was whining. Dean blinked. The pup was staring at the trees again. Another sound. Crunch. Slow. Measured. Not wolves. Not wildlife. Footsteps. Dean's hand moved silently to his flashlight. He clicked it off. Darkness swallowed the shelter. He held his breath. The steps stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, "Dean!" A voice. Sharp. Human. He turned the light back on and aimed it toward the sound. Maya stood 20 feet away, breathless, her service pistol drawn but pointed downward, cheeks red from the cold, eyes wide with relief. "Dean! Jesus!" she exhaled, lowering her weapon. Dean let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You came! You didn't check in." Scout, sensing the shift, whimpered and stood, tail wagging just once before slumping again. Maya approached, eyes falling on Luna. "God, that leg's bad, but she's stable?" "For now." Maya knelt beside the dogs, pulling a small heat pack from her parka pocket and slipping it beneath Scout's chest. Her vet instincts kicked in immediately. "You disobeyed orders," Dean said quietly. She glanced up. "So did you." They shared a look. Not apology, not regret, just understanding. Dean glanced toward the forest. "Poachers in the area. Saw boot prints." Maya's face hardened. "Let's get them safe first. Then we'll worry about that." The sky over Timber Ridge bled slowly into a dull gray as dawn crept over the horizon, but sunlight never truly touched the forest floor. Instead, a pale, colorless mist unfurled between the trees, thick and restless like breath from 1,000 sleeping giants. The temperature had dropped further through the night, coating every branch and pine needle with silver frost. Each step cracked faintly beneath the snow's crust, winter's way of whispering that every move mattered. Dean Callahan tightened the straps on his pack, already burdened by extra supplies, and then carefully hoisted Luna onto his back. She was lighter than she looked, malnourished, likely hadn't eaten in days, but still, the weight pressed into Dean's shoulders like penance. He had fashioned a sling using his belt, a broken tree limb, and Maya's emergency canvas tarp. It wasn't elegant, but it kept Luna secure and mostly still. Her eyes blinked slowly, still groggy from pain and exhaustion, but she didn't resist. She trusted them now. Scout, energized by some unseen resolve, ran a few feet ahead, tail up, stopping every dozen paces to look back. His gait had grown more confident, even defiant. He had led them here, had stood guard in the dark, and now he led again, this time toward salvation. Maya walked behind them, rifle across her chest, scanning the tree line with trained eyes. The youngest officer on Timber Ridge's force, Maya Lee, was deceptively composed. Her frame was lean, almost slight beneath her winter gear, but her steps were purposeful, boots crunching through fresh snow with certainty. Her past as a veterinary student gave her a sharp sense for wounded movement, for the way a creature shifted when it was close to collapse. She kept her focus split, half on the forest, half on Dean's tightening posture. "You're sure you can carry her the whole way?" she asked, breath visible in quick puffs. Dean didn't answer at first. The strain was written on his face, jaw clenched, brows drawn tight, but he kept walking. "She carried him. I can carry her." Ahead of them, the trail dipped into a shallow ravine, where a narrow creek cut through the landscape. In summer, it would have been a soft trickle between smooth stones, but now it was frozen solid, the ice glassy and treacherous, with thin patches where water still flowed beneath. Scout approached it cautiously, sniffing the surface before crossing. Dean followed, boots skimming over slick frost. Every muscle in his legs screamed, not from fatigue, but from restraint. One slip could mean a broken leg for both him and Luna. Maya was last to cross. Halfway over, she paused, squinting at her watch. "Signal's back," she called out, lifting her wrist. "1 bar." Dean stopped. "Enough for a call?" "No, but maybe a ping." She tapped into her location tracking app and sent a beacon to dispatch. The signal blinked, then stalled. "Partial signal sent," Maya murmured. "It'll have to do." Dean adjusted Luna's position gently. She let out a soft whine, muzzle twitching against his shoulder. He whispered something unintelligible to her, something quiet, private. Then Scout's bark shattered the calm. It wasn't a warning bark. It was an eruption. Raw, desperate, rising in pitch like a siren. Dean dropped into a half-crouch instantly, turning toward the sound. Scout stood ahead, stiff as a board, barking furiously into the mist. Maya lifted her rifle, scanning the area with sharp eyes. "Movement?" she asked. Dean didn't answer. Scout didn't stop. The mist swallowed everything beyond 20 feet, but sound traveled far. His bark echoed off the trees like an alarm through a cathedral. The kind of sound you don't just hear. You feel it in your ribs. Then, bang. A single gunshot cracked through the forest, distant but unmistakable. Maya spun toward the sound, lowered the barrel, and fired one round into the air. "Warning shot," she said. Dean looked at her. "That wasn't us." She nodded grimly. "I know." The forest went dead silent again. Dean dropped to one knee, lowering Luna carefully into the snow. He reached for the revolver on Maya's hip, and she didn't stop him. He checked the cylinder, loaded, safety off. Scout had gone silent now, but his stance hadn't changed. His eyes were fixed on something neither of them could yet see. The fog shifted, a shadow, not animal, human, then another, faint outlines, fading fast. Dean raised the revolver, but Maya stopped him with a hand to his arm. "They're leaving. That shot wasn't meant for us. It was a scare tactic." "Scare who?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward, rifle lowered, but ready. Dean stood beside her, but the mist swallowed the shapes before they could get close. It was enough to leave a trail. Footprints in the frost. Unmistakable boot treads, deep and erratic. Dean knelt by them. "Same as last night." Maya didn't disagree. She pulled out a small trail camera from her pack, standard issue from the forestry team, and scanned the surrounding trees. She pointed to a nearby pine, the bark scarred and stripped near eye level. "Poachers mark trees when they set traps," she said. "That's old school. This one's been here at least a few days." She mounted the camera quickly, adjusting the motion detector and lens toward the path. "Every ranger post in Timber Ridge got upgraded to motion capture last year," she said. "They just didn't get around to syncing the whole grid yet." Dean glanced back at Scout, now pawing gently at Luna's blanket. "They're moving through here like they own it," Dean muttered. "And if they're placing traps this close to public roads—" "They're not amateurs," Maya finished. Dean nodded. They returned to Luna, carefully lifting her again. Dean bore the weight, Maya guided the path, and Scout resumed his place out front, this time his ears back and head low. He was no longer leading with hope. He was leading with caution. As they climbed the last ridge before the forest's edge, the mist began to thin. Sunlight, weak but present, filtered through the thinning cloud. In the distance, a red light blinked, a rescue beacon. Maya had called for medevac an hour earlier. Help was coming. But Dean didn't look relieved. He looked behind them, into the trees, toward the place the barks had chased away ghosts in the fog. The storm had passed by the time the helicopter arrived. Dawn filtered weakly through the clouds, washing Timber Ridge in hues of iron blue and pale gold. The forest behind them was silent now. No more shadows in the mist, no distant gunshots, just the brittle quiet of a world that had survived the night. Dean sat on the cold metal bench in the rescue chopper, Luna strapped down in a padded crate beside him, still sedated, her breathing shallow but stable. Scout had been wrapped in a thermal blanket and nestled on Dean's lap during the flight, head buried in the crook of his arm, finally asleep after hours of alertness. Maya sat across from them, her face unreadable beneath her protective goggles and wind-burned cheeks. She didn't say much on the way back. Neither did Dean. Words seemed out of place after the things they'd witnessed, after the things that hadn't yet been said. Now, 6 hours later, the three of them were back in Timber Ridge, but scattered, each confined to a different space. The town's Wildlife Rehabilitation Center sat on the edge of the park boundary, a modest complex with 4 medical rooms, 2 recovery kennels, and 1 surgery suite staffed mostly by volunteers. The director, Dr. Evelyn Cho, was a calm but intense woman in her early 50s, with cropped silver-black hair, a thin build, and a quiet way of moving that made animals instinctively trust her. Born in Anchorage, Alaska, Evelyn had grown up among sled dogs and frostbite. She'd lost her left ear to frostburn at 16 and had worn her gray wool caps ever since. She rarely smiled, but when she did, it felt like sunlight on snow. "Luna needs immediate orthopedic surgery," Evelyn had said when they arrived. "The leg is bad, very bad, possible infection, nerve damage. I'm prepping the table now. You'll have to wait outside." Dean had nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Scout, however, had not accepted it so easily. As soon as the gurney rolled Luna down the corridor, Scout followed, tail down, paws tapping frantically on the tile. A vet tech tried to lift him away, but Scout snapped. Just once, sharp and panicked, then flung himself against the double doors where Luna had disappeared. He howled. It wasn't the sound of pain, it wasn't fear, it was heartbreak. They placed Scout in an adjacent holding room, a clean, quiet enclosure with a glass wall and heated floor. It had toys, a blanket, food, and water, but none of that mattered. Scout paced, circled, whined. Every 10 minutes he returned to the glass, front paws braced, nose pressed against the barrier, trying to hear what had happened beyond it. When the sedation began to wear off, he started to bark. When no one came, he started to howl. Dean stood on the other side of the glass, watching. A nurse offered coffee. He didn't take it. Another offered a cot in the hallway. He didn't move. He sat on the tile, back to the wall, eyes on Scout. And when the pup stopped barking, when his body gave up and he simply laid there, facing the door, breathing slow and broken, Dean could hear it. In that silence. A rhythm he recognized. Not the noise of an animal missing its kin. The echo of a man who had once held a dying partner in his arms, helpless. Maya returned that evening with files. One of them, marked in red, bore a name Dean hadn't heard in nearly a decade. "Caleb North," she said, dropping the file beside him. Dean looked up slowly. "You're sure?" "Absolutely." She opened the folder to a surveillance photo from 2 days ago. A man in camouflage, setting something metallic beneath a pine tree. His face was angled toward the camera. Long jaw, yellowed beard, heavy brows over cold, pale eyes. Game camera caught him in the woods near the South Trail. Same boot print pattern you found. Same trap design. Dean stared at the photo. Caleb North had been his case back in 2016. A poacher with priors, caught setting bear traps near protected cougar territory. Dean had been the arresting officer, testified in court, pushed for the full 5-year sentence. "He did 4 years, Maya said. Got out last fall, off the grid since. No fixed address, but he's been seen around here. Ranger Dispatch got a noise complaint last week near the Ridge Trail. Someone firing at night. We think it's him." Dean's jaw tightened. And now he's taking it out on animals. More than that, he's baiting game corridors with wounded prey, using traps to slow them, possibly training dogs to herd the injured into isolated zones. Dean glanced back through the glass at Scout, still motionless, still staring toward Luna's door. Maya softened. He's trying to destroy what's defenseless. He thinks that's power. Dean didn't reply. Inside the room, Scout finally rose. He walked, slow, stiff, to the untouched bowl of water. He stared at it, then turned away. Dean opened the door. He stepped inside, closed it behind him, and crouched. Scout looked up. For a second, just a second, Dean saw the flicker of recognition. Then the pup collapsed into his lap. Not playfully, not with energy, but as if surrendering. His body sagged, and he let out one long, tremulous breath against Dean's chest. Dean didn't speak. He just held him. One arm wrapped around the pup's ribs, the other resting on his head, fingers smoothing over fur gone cold. Somewhere in the building, a heart monitor beeped softly. Dean closed his eyes. The walls of the Timber Ridge Wildlife Center didn't echo. They absorbed everything. The cries, the sighs, the stillness. In Recovery Room B, where the light was always low and machines pulsed quietly in rhythms of life and pain, Luna lay sedated on a padded mat, her hind leg bound in a sling of bandages, stitches, and titanium. The surgery had lasted just over 4 hours. The verdict had come with heavy honesty from Dr. Evelyn Cho. Luna would live, but her back right leg would never move again. The nerves had died. The trap had taken too much. Even so, survival was a kind of miracle, and miracles often came at a price. Across from the room, separated only by a wall of tempered glass and a thin line of hope, Scout lay pressed against the pane. He hadn't moved in over 2 hours. His small frame, lean and raw-boned from days without proper food, sat rigid. His nose touched the glass, fogging it with each shallow exhale. His eyes never blinked, never drifted. He was watching her. Even sedated, Luna seemed to sense the presence beyond the glass. Her ears twitched, her breathing adjusted. But she didn't open her eyes. Not yet. Dean stood at the far end of the corridor, arms folded across his chest, shoulder pressed against the wall. He hadn't left the center since Scout was placed in observation. He showered once at Maya's insistence and came back still damp, hair combed only by his fingers. He looked like he hadn't slept in years, but his eyes were steady now, like something inside had found gravity again. Dr. Cho approached with a chart tucked under her arm. She wore her usual dark turtleneck and a blue fleece jacket patched at the elbows, reading glasses perched on her nose. She had the gait of someone who refused to let age dictate her pace. "She's stabilizing," she said, nodding toward Luna. "Appetite will return once the anesthesia clears and pain management's in place." Dean tilted his head. "Will she know him?" Dr. Cho gave a small, rare smile. "She already does." Beside the glass, Scout lifted his head slightly, just an inch. His ears perked. Luna's paw twitched. "It's time," Dr. Cho said, stepping forward. She pressed a button, and the inner blinds between the rooms lifted slowly, revealing Luna in full. Scout's ears shot up, his body tensed, then slowly crept closer to the pane. Luna stirred. Her eyes opened, drowsy, unfocused. She blinked once, then again. Scout didn't bark. He didn't whimper. He just growled. A low, guttural, almost imperceptible sound. Not one of the threat, but of recognition. A rumble meant for her and her alone. Inside the recovery room, Luna turned her head and looked directly at him. She didn't lift her head. Her limbs barely shifted, but her gaze held, steady and soft, and her ears tilted toward him. That was all Scout needed. He pressed his forehead against the glass and let out one long exhale. Dean looked away for a moment. The hallway light caught in the corner of his eye, just enough to make him blink harder than necessary. Later that evening, while the recovery ward remained quiet, Dean sat in the administrative office, a thin pen gripped tightly in his hand. Before him was a form, an official request for reinstatement with the Timber Ridge Police Department. He'd left the box marked "Reason for Return" blank for nearly an hour. When he finally wrote, it was only one sentence. "A puppy saved my life." He didn't add that the pup had also restored something he thought long gone, the willingness to fight, not just survive. He didn't add that Scout reminded him what it looked like to protect someone with no thought of one's own safety. He didn't add that in 1 week, a broken-legged dog and her son had taught him more about love than any badge ever had. He just signed his name. Maya found him there an hour later, staring at the wall as if it might answer back. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You wrote it?" she asked. Dean nodded. She walked in, glanced at the form, read the single sentence, and didn't comment. Instead, she set a paper cup on the desk. Black coffee, strong, hot. "They're both asleep," she said quietly. "Scout hasn't left that spot. We tried moving him. He barked." Dean gave a dry chuckle. "Of course he did." She hesitated, then added, "You know what that reminds me of?" He shook his head. "A case I studied in vet school," she said. "2 elephants. One was injured in a flood. The calf stood over her for days, refused food, refused water, even turned aggressive when staff tried to move him. It wasn't instinct, it was grief and faith. Dean looked at her. I think Scout believes if he waits long enough she'll come back, completely. Dean didn't respond. He didn't have to. Back in the hallway, Scout finally laid down, head still facing Luna's window. His eyes slowly closed, his breathing deepened, and for the first time since they arrived, he slept without a sound. The snow had begun to melt. Slowly, quietly, it surrendered to the softer breath of spring. Pine needles peeked through patches of slush, and the wooden porch of Dean Callahan's remote cabin in the Timber Ridge foothills finally stopped groaning under the weight of winter. It was April, and while the nights still bit at the edges of warmth, the days were brighter, filled with birdsong and the smell of thawing soil. Luna lay on a wool blanket by the hearth, her body lean but stronger now, her once sharp ribs now hidden beneath a healthy coat of silver-gray fur. The surgical scars were fading, but her right hind leg remained motionless, curled under her side. She had learned to balance on 3 legs, limping slowly but steadily around the cabin. Her dignity remained untouched. Even in her limp, there was grace. Scout had grown into a striking young German shepherd, taller, more muscular, coat darkened into a sleek blend of coal and caramel. His eyes, once filled with raw panic, now glinted with a mature alertness. He still slept curled against Luna every night, resting his head on her shoulder as if guarding her heartbeat. But during the day, he patrolled. From the porch to the tree line, Scout ran quiet loops like a sentinel. Dean had officially adopted both dogs 2 weeks after Luna's release from the center. The paperwork sat in a simple wooden frame near the fireplace. Above it, a photo Maya had taken. Dean, in a flannel shirt, crouching beside Luna, one hand on her chest, the other resting on Scout's head. The caption, handwritten in Maya's sharp block print, read, "Not found. Chosen." The cabin itself was a modest 2-bedroom log home built by Dean's grandfather in the 1970s, restored after a fire nearly took it a decade ago. Nestled at the edge of Timber Ridge National Forest, it sat beyond the reach of paved roads. Dean kept it mostly off-grid: wood stove, generator, a water tank filtered from the stream. It had become his sanctuary during suspension, and now it had become something more. A home. That night, the fire crackled low as Dean sat at the kitchen table, writing notes for an upcoming reinstatement interview. The paperwork had gone through. He'd been approved to return to the force, but this time he was requesting a new assignment: K-9 handler. Scout had passed his early temperament tests. He was protective, observant, intelligent. The trainer had said, "He's not your average rescue. There's loyalty, but there's also calculation. This dog thinks before he acts." Dean smiled at the memory. "Sounds like someone I used to know," he had replied. Just past midnight, Dean stood to check the porch. It had become a habit. One Scout usually beat him 2, but tonight the dog was still curled up beside Luna, ears twitching in half-sleep. Dean stepped out. The air was crisp. The pines rustled softly. Then, Scout barked. A single, sharp, guttural bark that echoed off the trees like a whip crack. Dean turned just as Scout bolted from the rug, bounded through the cracked cabin door and out onto the porch. He stopped beside Dean, hackles raised. "What is it?" Dean murmured. Scout growled low, pacing the edge of the porch. Dean followed his line of sight. Movement. At the tree line. Just a flicker, a shape too large to be deer, too slow to be a fox. Then it was gone. Dean went inside, grabbed the rifle from the wall, and stepped back onto the porch, boots crunching on old ice. Scout was already at the edge of the yard, nose to the ground, tracking. Dean's outdoor lights, motion-triggered, had flickered for a second. He glanced at the security feed on his tablet, a portable setup Maya had helped him install a week earlier. 4 cameras, one facing the road, one on the porch, 2 pointed toward the woods. He rewound 20 seconds. There it was. A figure, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark parka with a hood. He moved slowly, carefully, just inside the tree line. Dean froze the frame and zoomed in. The grainy footage was enough. Caleb North, still alive, still watching. Dean called Maya immediately. She picked up after the second ring, voice alert. "Tell me you're not just calling because you miss my coffee." "Caleb was here 10 minutes ago," Scout alerted. She didn't curse, but her silence said enough. "I have him on camera," Dean added. "Same build, same parka as the footage near the southern boundary trap. I'll run facial analysis and push a ranger sweep in the morning. Until then, lock down." "Already done." "Dean." "Yeah? I don't think this ends until we bring him in. You know that, right?" Dean looked out at the woods where Scout still circled like a sentry. "I know." Later that night, Scout didn't return to his bed. Instead, he lay at the door, nose pressed to the crack beneath the frame, growling softly at the scent of a threat not yet gone. And Dean sat beside him, rifle leaning against his chair, eyes on the fire, but his ears were in the forest. The forest was quiet that morning, too quiet. The kind of silence that didn't just feel like peace, but like a pause before something broke. The snow had melted into muddy rivulets, the pine needles glistened with dew, and the sun cut long shadows between the trees. Dean Callahan moved carefully through the underbrush, boots pressing softly into thawed earth, one hand on the grip of his sidearm, the other holding a radio to his ear. "Anything?" Maya's voice crackled through. "Not yet, but Scout's locked onto something. He's not pulling anymore, he's circling." Maya was 30 yards behind, sweeping the opposite side of the ravine. Dressed in a dark patrol jacket and cargo vest, her long braid tucked into her collar, she looked smaller than usual against the vastness of the woods, but there was no mistaking the tension in her shoulders. She moved like someone ready for a storm. They had waited nearly 3 weeks since the night Caleb North appeared on Dean's cameras. They'd worked with the rangers to build a quiet perimeter around Dean's property and waited for a sign. Caleb was clever, never crossed the same path twice, never left tracks in soft snow, but not even he could mask scent from a dog that had learned survival in blood and smoke. This morning, Scout had bolted from the porch just after sunrise, tail high, eyes fixed on the ridge. He hadn't barked. He had moved like a shadow with purpose. Dean had followed instantly, rifle over his back, and Maya met him in the woods within 15 minutes. Scout was now 5 feet ahead, nose to the ground, pacing in slow circles near the base of a cedar tree. Then he froze. Dean's hand tightened on the holster, a crack from the north. Maya's voice on the radio. "Movement, 40 feet uphill, heading east." Then Scout growled, a deep, low sound Dean hadn't heard since that night in the snow, and in one motion, the dog shot forward into the trees. "Scout!" Dean called, but it was too late. Dean sprinted after him, breath sharp in his chest. Maya was already on the move, boots pounding the forest floor. The trees blurred past, branches whipped at his arms, his face, but he didn't stop. A shout rang out. Not Maya. Caleb. Dean burst through the thicket just in time to see Scout tackle the man, low and fast, taking him to the ground near a rock face. Caleb North was bigger than expected, broader, face lined with age and rage. His beard was grayer now, tangled. His eyes, pale and wide, burned with the kind of hate that came from years of blame. He kicked Scout off and scrambled to his feet, swinging a hunting knife from his belt. "Stay back!" he shouted. Dean raised his weapon. "Drop it, Caleb." But Caleb didn't. He lunged forward toward Scout. The world seemed to slow, and then a blur of silver gray shot from the trees. Luna. She hit Caleb at the hip, full force, staggering him back. Her body, though smaller, though hindered by a dead leg, moved with ferocity only motherhood could summon. She didn't bark. She didn't whimper. She stood between Caleb and Scout, head low, lips curled, trembling but unyielding. Caleb froze, knife still in hand. Maya arrived from behind and drew her weapon. "Don't move!" Caleb turned slowly, too slowly, and Dean took his shot. One rubber round to the shoulder. Caleb dropped with a grunt, the knife clattering to the dirt. He was cuffed within seconds, face down, breath heaving. Dean looked at Luna, her body still taut, her chest rising fast. She turned to Scout and licked his ear once before collapsing on the ground, panting. Maya exhaled. "That," she said, staring at Luna in awe, "is the courage of a mother who doesn't need legs, just heart." Dean knelt beside Luna, running a hand gently over her back. "You did it, girl. You saved your son." Scout curled beside her instantly, resting his head on her paw. The case was over. Caleb North was taken into custody, charged with multiple counts of illegal trapping, wildlife endangerment, and assault on law enforcement. But none of the reports would capture what truly happened: that a crippled dog had stood between a killer and her child and changed the ending. 1 year later, the snow had long since melted. Spring turned to summer, then fall again, and the story of Luna and Scout became part of Timber Ridge's quiet mythology. At the center of town, in Riverside Memorial Park, a new bronze statue stood beneath an old cedar tree. It was small, no more than 4 feet tall, but meticulously sculpted, a German shepherd pup standing in the middle of a dirt road, facing the imagined beam of an unseen car, eyes blazing with determination. One paw lifted slightly, the body lean but firm, the stance unyielding. Beneath it, a plaque: "To the little one who dared to stop traffic to save a life." Dean stood beside the statue that day, in uniform again, a newly trained Scout at his side. Luna rested in the grass nearby, chin on paws, watching with calm pride. Maya stood behind them, hands in her jacket, sunglasses hiding her eyes, but not the smile on her lips. The townsfolk clapped softly, and somewhere in the breeze it felt as though the forest itself paused to remember a night long ago when a pup had stood in the snow, alone but fearless, and refused to let the world move on without love. We don't get to choose where our stories begin, but we do get to choose who walks beside us through the chapters ahead. A little dog, once alone in the snow, didn't just find a new home. He reignited a broken man's spirit, bridged the silence between strangers, and became a keeper of all that was nearly forgotten: loyalty, courage, and love that doesn't ask for anything in return. In our everyday lives, we often pass by stories unfolding quietly, acts of bravery hidden in small bodies, hope tucked into tired eyes. But sometimes, if we pause and listen, we'll hear them: soft howls in the wind, reminding us to stop, to look, and to care. If this story touched your heart, share it. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter in our journey. And to all who watch, may God bless you and those you hold dear. Sometimes angels walk beside us on 4 legs.